lips. "Can't you fucking block the accounts?" he muttered to his lawyer. "Too late," the lawyer muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "She beat us to it." He called me that same evening. The minister had summoned him. "Do you realize what you've done?" His voice trembled with rage. "You've destroyed my career." For the first time in his life, he felt he couldn't apply pressure, couldn't solve the problem with a call or a threat. She had won. "No, Dima," I replied calmly. "You destroyed it yourself when you decided you could use your official position to. I just opened everyone's eyes to who you really are." "What are you trying to achieve?" Desperation now tinged his voice. "Justice," I repeated. Influential officials tried to salvage the situation, but the compromising material was already circulating in elite circles. From dacha meetings to clarifying circumstances, but he still hoped to wriggle out and preserve his relationship with Victoria. His hopes were not meant to be. I delivered the crushing blow at a closed business reception, which Dmitry, despite the scandal, had been invited to. I also received an invitation, having accompanied him to such events for many years. I came alone, elegant and composed, drawing sympathetic glances and whispers behind my back. During the reception, journalists received an anonymous leak, documents about money transfers, Dmitry's correspondence with his mistress, and, most importantly, photos of Victoria meeting with another wealthy man, the deputy head of a large state-owned company. She was playing a double game. At first, Dmitry noticed nothing. He stood with a glass of champagne, smiling and shaking hands as if nothing had happened. But gradually the atmosphere in the hall began to change. First, there were barely noticeable signs, conversations cut short when he passed by, sideways glances from waiters whispering among themselves and sneaking looks at him. Dmitry felt something was wrong when he saw his longtime business partner quickly put away his phone upon his approach and give a strained smile. A few minutes later, the same man was at the other end of the hall, showing something on his smartphone screen to a group of influential officials. They all turned and stared at Dmitry. A wave of whispers swept through the hall. Dmitry saw people, covering their mouths with their hands, exchanging fragments of phrases, taxpayer money, mistress, seeing two at once. His phone vibrated. A message from his assistant, "You urgently need to see this," with a link. Dmitry opened it and paled. Everything he had so carefully hidden was now on display. He looked around with new eyes and understood, everyone knows. Every person in that hall had seen the photos, read the messages, knew about the money. Some averted their gaze out of politeness, others openly stared at him as if he were a curious animal in a zoo, still others smirked with schadenfreude. There was contempt. The deputy head of the corporation, a man with whom he had closed multi-million-dollar deals, was standing 2 steps away, looking at Victoria with murderous fury. "So that's why you were always asking for money," he hissed. Dmitry opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. For the first time in his life, he was not in control of the situation. The wife of that businessman, who was also at the reception, caused a loud scene, exposing Victoria in front of everyone. "So this is the Vika my husband is always talking about," she shouted, showing a photo on her phone of Victoria leaving an expensive restaurant with her husband. "Did you think no one would find out you're sleeping with 2 men for profit?" Dmitry stood pale, watching as his mistress, who had until recently been whispering vows of eternal love and devotion, tried to justify herself but only got more tangled in her lies. "Dima, tell them," she grabbed his sleeve. "Tell them we're just in love." Dmitry didn't move. "Dima," panic crept into her voice. Our eyes met across the room. He looked at me with a gaze full of rage, fear, and pleading. But I was no longer the woman who had once been afraid of losing him. I walked past him. He sharply drew in a breath, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. And then I understood, he was afraid of me. In my eyes, there was no triumph, only the calm confidence of a person who had restored justice. Victoria, unable to bear the shame, ran out of the hall in tears. Dmitry, trying to preserve the last shreds of his dignity, headed for the exit. The minister was saying something angrily to him, pointing at the door. I approached one of the journalists. "Want an exclusive?" I asked with a slight smile. A story about how love and devotion can be traded for a young body, and then you lose everything. The journalist turned on his recorder. I'm talking to the press now, I said, tilting my head. Dmitri stepped towards me, but I just looked right through him as if he were empty air. You didn't want this, he muttered. I tilted my head, as if thinking, then smiled. After the public scandal, Dmitri was forced to sign the divorce under my strict terms. He not only lost a significant portion of the jointly acquired assets but also his position. The ministry could not keep an official who had tarnished its reputation. Victoria disappeared from his life, moving on to a new patron. Former colleagues and friends tried not to notice Dmitri, afraid that association with him could harm their own careers. From a successful official with prospects, he turned into a pariah who had to start life over. His former colleagues found him a placement out of town so he wouldn't be underfoot in the capital. Dmitri sat in his office. Just yesterday, a spacious office with a view of the city center, today, a small room in a provincial department. He picked up the phone and dialed an old acquaintance. Listen, I need help. I need to rebuild my connections, he began. Sorry, Dima, the voice sounded tense. We can't communicate anymore. The dial tone. Through mutual acquaintances, I found out that one evening, sitting in a smoky bar in a provincial town, he saw a story about me on the TV screen. I was giving an interview about a new project, an online platform for women who had become victims of domestic violence or spousal betrayal. I know what it's like to have the ground disappear from under your feet when the person you trust betrays you, I said from the screen, but I also know that you can emerge from the darkest periods of life stronger than before. He picked up his phone. No calls, no messages. Not from Victoria, not from friends. Just emptiness. Sitting in the bar, he watched as his ex-wife smiled from the television, successful, strong. He, on the other hand, was now a nobody. Blood pounded in his temples. This should have been his life, but he had given it away himself. Dmitri downed his whiskey in one gulp, threw a bill on the table, and left the bar. My interview painfully reminded him of how much he had lost because of a momentary weakness that turned into a 6-month affair. Dmitri ran his hand over his phone screen, where an old text conversation with me had opened. He wanted to write "forgive me," but erased it. He knew I wouldn't answer anymore. I didn't just leave, taking my share. I started a new life, using my experience and the divorce settlement. I launched an anonymous online project, The Shadow Side of Power, a platform exposing corruption and double standards among the elite. Gradually, people began sending in stories, documents, correspondences. The information became public knowledge. Many influential men found themselves in uncomfortable positions, but no one knew who was behind the project. Influential men began deleting accounts, changing phones, avoiding the press. My platform made them afraid. I looked at the screen. New names, new stories on the list. Not just about infidelity, but about bribes, schemes, crimes. In parallel, I created a foundation to help women affected by domestic violence and spousal betrayal, offering them legal and psychological support. My experience had shown that even the most influential men are not all powerful if a woman is ready to fight for herself and her future. Our task is to help those who find themselves alone with their trouble, I said at the foundation's opening. I entered a new social circle, where I met an interesting man, an independent journalist named Alexei, who offered to tell my story without revealing my identity. Your story could inspire many women in similar situations, he said at our first meeting. To show that you can fight the system and win. Aren't you afraid they'll come for you now? He asked. I smiled. They've already come. They just don't know I'm waiting for them. I agreed to a series of anonymous interviews, which soon became the most discussed material in independent media. Women from different cities wrote that my experience gave them the strength to leave toxic relationships and start a new life. Years later, I was sitting in a cozy cafe, reviewing messages on the Shadow Side of Power platform. The project had grown, turning into a serious media outlet with a team of investigative journalists. I realized I had a chance to expose a few more high-ranking officials who were using their positions and betraying their loved ones. Alexei, who by that time had become not only my business partner but also a close person, noticed my thoughtful expression. "Something interesting?" he asked. I smiled warmly, but with a barely perceptible predatory note. It no longer mattered. I was no longer the abandoned wife of an official. Now I was a force, a woman who was not afraid to challenge the system and win. In the evening, sitting in my new office, I reviewed offers from publishers wanting to publish a book about my story. My experience was becoming an example for thousands of women in similar situations. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself," I wrote in the preface to the future book. My husband betrayed me. But in doing so, he gave me a chance to start life over on my own terms. Now I know that nothing is impossible for a woman who has decided to fight for her freedom and dignity. I raised a glass of champagne and looked in the mirror. It wasn't the abandoned wife looking back. It was me, free, strong, and finally, happy.